Right, so the equipment for the Jarl has finally been revealed. Well, the majority of it. Plus one extra card sprinkled in, I guess, for the fun of it, right? So, yeah, nonetheless, that's what we're going over today. So, it was all thanks to a Polygon article, which I will link in the description if you want to give it a read yourself. But nonetheless, on to the first piece, which is the Legendary. Now, show of hands, who was expecting some Legendary booties? I know I was, unfortunately. Well, not unfortunately, because what we got is actually quite nice. We got ourselves some Gauntlets of the Boreal Domain. So, once per turn, pay 2. If an Earth card is pitched this way, your attack's name Mangle get +2 for the turn. If an Ice card is pitched this way, your attack's name Mangle get Dominate for the turn. Go again, Temper, and 2 blocks. So, yeah, quite the legendary effect, but I'm glad they reined it in and sort of made it Jarl specific. Now, of course, Oldhim and Bravo can certainly make use of this piece and can run some Mangle mechanics, but overall I do think it is pretty much a Jarl legendary, right? So it has legendary effects, but it's more akin to Majestic and Rarity, which is fitting because obviously it's pseudo print to demand, right? For every Jarl deck that gets printed, one of these legendaries is in circulation, so I highly expect it not to be super chase. I would also highly expect, we don't know for sure, but we get a rainbow foil variant, right? And the cold foil probably appears in like a judge pack or something. But nonetheless, let's talk about the effects. So, if you pitch an Earth Guard, Mangle gets to attack, right, for the whole turn. So every Mangle you play, if you somehow find a way to loop a whole bunch of Mangles together, and that's probably what I'm gonna go looking for, right? Or more importantly, if an Ice card is pitched this way, Mangle gets a Dominate for the turn, which I do think is the significantly better effect, right? Because that will generally net you a greater than 2 amount of damage when it comes to Mangle and landing Crush. So overall, you do want to most likely pitch an Ice card. Now, the general idea behind it being 2 cost is you pitch a blue, right? That floats 1 resource, and that 1 resource plus another blue covers the cost of Mangle. So it is very nicely statted. It's definitely going to be the Jarl's bread and butter, and so is Mangle. So with this, as well as Unforgetting Unforgiving, which is one of the reasons why I say Oldhim and Bravo can make use of the Gauntlets, but not as well as the Jarl, is because the Jarl has cards like Unforgetting and Unforgiving, which is his spec, and when it defends, you get to basically search for Mangle, banish it, and playing it during your next action phase, which is obviously a terrific effect. It takes Mangle from 3 in 60 generally, right, to kinda 6 in 60. So yeah, you definitely want to be playing Mangles. Begs the question, though, if we're going to see something else, some sort of other interaction with Mangle, probably by way of recycling it to the deck, because you can't hit it with Memorial Realm, right? You can't hit it with the majority of Earth cards, because it's not an Elemental Guardian action. And you can only hit it with Remembrance as of current, right? Because Runeblade has the juicier Earth cards that recycle a bit more broader of cards, and then of course it being an attack action with a 4 cost, yeah. So I do kind of expect us to see some sort of Mangle recyclage, right? So that we can actually get more use out of the Gauntlets, because just 3 in the deck sort of seems a bit bare, right? Or another line of thought I had was maybe a Mangle adjacent card, so to speak, right? Where it's like Mangle ... and a lesser effect, or another Jarl spec that's another version of Mangle, or maybe even like a souped up Mangle, like a legendary Mangle, right? Because we do still have a few Majestic slots left, and we'll go over that eventually, right? But nonetheless, Mangle is bread and butter. Legendary is a superb effect, and will obviously be a auto include for almost every Jarl deck, because yeah, Jarl is a Mangler, right? On to his weapon. So, we have Summit the Unforgiving. Once per turn action, pay 6, so quite hefty, right? And when this hits a hero, create a Frostbite token in one of their exposed zones. So again, once you start to peel away an opponent's armor, you open them up to Frostbite through this new exposed mechanic, and that's quite nifty, right? But the big effect is the one down here with the new keyword called Heavy. So, if this is the only card equipped to your weapon zone, it gets +2. So this is a one-hand polearm, right, for Earth, Ice, Guardian, and it starts off at 4 attack, but the whole idea here is you start off with a shield, say something like Stalagmite, right, which I'm sure is on the rise in terms of pricing, but nonetheless, you start with a shield, and then as it gets worn down and you use up its effect, you then turn your Summit the Unforgiving from a 6 for 4 into a 6 for 6, right, and that is some pretty hefty late game value, so it pretty much sum ups. No, that was bad. I was trying to make a Summit pun, right? The whole game plan of Jarl, which is going to obviously be heavy fatigue and frostbite, into just getting maximum value out of this weapon. And then heavy as a mechanic going forward is definitely exciting, right? Because we are obviously getting to longer games with Flex Constructed. You know, almost every deck is hitting that second cycle and going a bit further than that. Altogether, I'd love to see this type of effect on equipment, right? Something where maybe a piece of equipment gets more souped up if it's the last equipment piece you control, or, you know, a few equipment pieces left, sort of inverse to the whole Evo synergy. That would be kind of nifty. But nonetheless, a fantastic weapon, and I can definitely see why design-wise it is a lot of LSS's favorite, right? Thematically, beautiful. You can imagine Jarl going into battle, this in tow with a shield. Shield gets shattered, discards it, grips it with two hands, and then just starts wailing on people with Summit. So it is a beautiful weapon, and thematically and in its design is wonderful. Definitely going to see a lot of play. Might even see a wider play, right? I can see Oldhim switching to this with a shield as well, just again to make more use of that late game value. And if you take, you know, some ways to shred your opponent's armor, then you can also benefit from the frostbite, similar to Whale. I know Winter's Whale, is that correct? The hammer, right? But yeah, so a very nice weapon. Now on to the rest of the equipment, starting off with the all-in Icecap. Now, the rest of the equipment is pretty much your just Armory deck filler, in a sense, right? It is definitely decent equipment, but it's not really going to translate well to Class Construct, at least that's my opinion. So yeah, it's decent for the deck, but nothing mind-blowing, similar to the weapon or the legendary, which was to be expected, right? They can't all be, you know, hits out of the park. Although, you know, if you compare it to some of the other Armory decks, right, I think the Ranger was probably the most impactful across the board, but altogether we have going one or two pieces that definitely shine, and I personally, I don't feel like any of these really do. So starting off the all-in Icecap, when this defends together with an Ice Guard, create a Frostbite token under the attacking hero's control, right, decent effect. Problem is the Blade Break and the one use. I think if this had Temper, or even Guardwell, right, and you could sort of take advantage of some of the other Guardian cards that allow you to buff up your equipment, right, and get those extra blocks out of it, I think that would have been perfect. But with the fact that it's Blade Break and one off use, again, if you're going for Disruption, I mean, there's the Coronet's Peak as the legendary, right, which is a very similar effect to Frostbite, if not a little bit better sometimes, right, because you generally, you know, disrupt their hand if you make them pitch something away. Then they've lost that going into their turn, and they also don't get the resources. It also has 2 armor instead of 1, so its block value is a little bit better. But generally speaking, there are better helms as Guardian than either of these, right? So then we have the chest piece, which is probably the better of the 3, right? So Tectonic Crust. When this defends together with an Earth card, create a Seismic Surge token. Does have Temper, so you do get multiple uses out of it. Problem for me is it seems like we're not in a 50-50 split. I wouldn't even say like 75-25. It almost feels 80-20, maybe 90-10 when it comes to the Jarl and using Earth cards. I mean, we're still yet to see the deck, but he does feel like he wants to predominantly be in Ice with a dash of Earth, and the less Earth you take, less consistent this is, which, you know, makes it worse and worse and worse. But if he does have a decent core of Earth cards, I can see this being somewhat usable, right? If you combine it with cards like Nerve of Steel, or again, Warforged, Time of Forge, I can't remember, right? There's one Guardian that is a +1 to the defense value, right, of all your equipment pieces, and that can technically, you know, scapegoat Temper and its trigger, so that could get you an extra use out of Tectonic Crust, and then of course Nerves of Steel to remove counters from Temper. So there are ways to get multiple uses, more so than 2, out of the Tectonic Crust. It just, to me, doesn't stack up to the value of Tectonic Plating, right? Being able to stash away those extra resources that you have from your turn. Yeah, so because of that, again, perfect for the Armory deck. Definitely a decent effect, definitely a decent design, just nothing outstanding to, again, make a shift within the meta, right? Either Tectonic Plating or, again, doubling down on Fatigue and Frostbite, Heart of Ice is probably the better pick. And then we have the boots, which, to me, are probably the disappointing one, right? Again, with LSS knowing where Guardian is, the use of Civic Steps, the lackluster amount of leg equipment, to get this is, yeah, kind of lackluster. So, Root-Bound Trunks. When this defends together with an Aura card, create an embodiment of Earth token. Blade Break, and again, only 1 defense. So, I think, again, if this had Temper or Guardwell, that would definitely straight away make it competitive with Civic Steps, because obviously it has upside to it instead of giving your opponent a Quicken token. But then you also have the constraint of having to use an Aura card to get an embodiment of Earth token. So the reason why I don't value that highly is from what we've seen with the deck when it comes to Jarl, is all his aura cards are very much the cards he wants to play, not the cards he wants to block away with, and he wants to save them, either pitch them away or, again, play them straight away. And I don't think you take that many junk auras, right? You might have a few, but even if you do, you can only use it once. So, yeah, I think Civic Steps is still just going to be better value block over the course of a match anyway, right? With the rest of the equipment that you can take. So, yeah, again, for the Armory deck, decent. I might be missing something with it, but it doesn't quite have the power to, compare with Civic Steps in my mind, right? Okay, and then the last card that we got is Frozen to Death, which is a beautiful card because it has just so much utility to it. So it's blue, so it pitches for 3, blocks for 3, wonderful, right? And then it has use early, mid, and late game. So obviously in the early game, the idea would most likely be to cycle it away, but it has Ice Fusion. If this was fused, you may destroy an equipment with a negative counter on it, right? So beautiful. A little bit more of equipment destruction. So we will go over all the cards that Jarl does have access to, right? But this does, I think, take him to 15. So 1/4 of your deck, 1/4 of a 60-card deck, I should say, right? Because obviously you can take slightly more, is going to be equipment destruction. So I think that's a nice sweet spot, right, for the Jarl's game plan. It definitely cements in my mind that, destroying all your opponent's equipment is more early to mid-game than, a mid-game feat, right? You're definitely going to just end up stripping them there. And then its secondary effect, which is not tied to its fuse mechanic, is you may create a Frostbite token in exposed zone. So again, head, chest, arms, or legs, depending on what equipment you've peeled away. So the idea, right, to me, early game, you pitch it away or you block with it, right? Either's fine. Mid-game, you're using it to try and get that little destruction, right? Maybe open up a slot to then also benefit from the Frostbite. If you open up a second slot, then you'll be able to benefit from its own Frostbite generation and the Jarl's own ability, right? And then late game, the fact that it's just create 2 Frostbite tokens thanks to the Jarl's hero ability, I think is perfectly fine. Because again, the end game plan to me is, continue to create Frostbite and just swing your big hammer, right? So yeah, wonderful card. And again, talking about armor disruption, here are all the cards we have access to. So, Frozen to Death, Expose the Elements, Unforgetting, Unforgiving, Crumble to Eternity, Colossal Bearing, Mangle, Buckle, and Buckling Blow. Right, so of these 8 cards, we have 4 cards that allow you to put counters on your opponent's equipment, right? So Expose the Elements, Unforgetting, Unforgiving, Crumble to Eternity, and Buckling Blow. Buckling Blow, which is a common or rare, I can't quite remember, right? Because it's Welcome to Rathe, but you can run up to 9 copies, so it's a decent crush effect that then feeds into your equipment destruction. And then we have 5 cards that allow for equipment destruction. So Expose the Elements is a dual card, right? So depending on its fuse, right? Whether it's Earth or Ice, Earth allows you to put a negative counter. Ice will allow you to attempt to destroy your opponent's equipment. They do get a chance to pay resources to prevent it, but still sort of a in-between effect. And then Frozen Death, Colossal Bearing, Mangle, and Buckle are all going to allow you to destroy your opponent's equipment as long as they have counters on it, right? So 4 ways to stack up counters and 5 ways to beat them down, right? So yeah, that is definitely a decent toolkit for the Jarl. Colossal Bearing is probably the only one that's a bit questionable whether or not you're actually able to get that to its tower effect, right? Because instead of Crush, it's Tower, so it needs to have 13 or more attack for it to have the ability to destroy equipment. But the other 3 are super solid by way of Buckle, Mangle, and Frozen Death. And then again, Expose the Elements being the dual effect is quite fitting. Plus the fact that it's instant, so technically you can play it during your opponent's end step, right? Before they're able to restock resources to make sure you get off that equipment destruction, right? With all that in mind, these are all the Majestics that have been revealed so far for the Jarl. Now, there are 23 Majestics in total, right? Again, that count is not total Majestics, but total card counts of Majestics. So if we take away the 4 equipment pieces and then 3 sets of the 5 revealed Majestic, what that leaves us with is 4 Majestics. So most likely, right, a shield or a legendary Majestic action card. I kind of said that wrong, right? So a Majestic rarity legendary action card, right? Basically a card that you can only have 1 on in your classic constructed deck. And then another playset of a Majestic. So speaking of Exposed to the Elements, I do think that would be the most fitting card to include in the deck, right? Again, it has that duality, it has Earth and Ice fusion, right? So it's a bit more incentive to run a bit more Earth in the deck, and given the equipment, there's still going to be a decent chunk of Earth cards in the precon. So I do think it would be fitting to be the last Majestic, right? So I don't think we'd get another Majestic, right, aside from the Shield, right? And I do think a Shield is a bit more favorable than a Majestic Legendary action. So yeah, I'd put money on Expose the Elements, but another good contender for final Majestic of the Armory deck is going to be Buckle, right? Because Buckle is, again, another solid destruction effect. It is essentially the action equivalent of Mangle plus the new Legendary Arm piece. So yeah, definitely also a valid choice, right? I just think Expose the Elements fits the deck a little bit better. So with all that said and done, there we go. That's everything revealed so far for the Jarl's deck, right? Definitely looking interesting, looking pretty exciting, right? There's definitely going to be a few different playstyles. I can see people turning him into Earth go big, right? There's obviously just going to be Fatigue and Control and Frostbite. And then I myself I'm going to try and look into Mangles. And when I say Mangles, I mean like back-to-back Mangles. They gave me some Gauntlets that buff Mangles for a whole turn. I'm going to make use of that for the whole turn. Granted, Guardian has probably the least amount of draw left out of all the classes. So yeah, it'll be interesting to sift through.